Welcome back to the channel, where classic mystery, Victorian atmosphere, and careful deduction meet in original Sherlock Holmes adventures. Tonight's case carries us from the familiar rooms of Baker Street to a quiet Berkshire hotel, where a watched drawing room seems to shelter an impossible visitor. Settle in for a long-form mystery of hidden roots, misleading sounds, family secrets, and a final proof only Holmes could devise. Chapter 1. The Brass Key in the Rain. It was in the wet autumn of 1891, when the soot of London seemed to dissolve into the very rain, and every passing cab left a black ribbon upon the stones, that there came to us a case which I have always associated with a sound rather than a sight. I mean the thin, impatient ringing of our bell in Baker Street, repeated 3 times within as many seconds, while Holmes sat cross-legged upon the hearthrug with a violin string stretched between 2 brass weights. "Too great attention," said he, without looking toward the door. "A sound may tell you that an event occurred, Watson. It does not necessarily tell you where, when, or why." The bell rang again. "An admirer of your philosophy," I remarked, "or a man who believes the police are coming for him?" Mrs. Hudson entered almost at once. Behind her stood a tall, rain-darkened gentleman of perhaps 35, with a narrow, mobile face and the tired eyes of one who had passed more than one night without proper sleep. His coat was good, but carelessly buttoned. There was mud upon the left knee of his trousers, and a faint streak of grease paint at the edge of one thumbnail. "Mr. Adrian Calder," said he. "I was once on the stage. That fact, unfortunately, has become the chief evidence against me." Holmes motioned him to a chair. "You came from Berkshire this morning, changed trains at Reading, and spent the last hour at a solicitor's office before coming here." Calder stared. "The chalky clay upon the outer edge of your boot is common along the Merriwick Road. Your return half-ticket protrudes from your pocket. The sealing wax on your cuff is of the violet sort, used by Belling and Say in Bedford Row. You need not waste time on the journey." Our visitor gave a short laugh, which ended without amusement. "Then perhaps you can save me from the destination. Inspector Hale of the Berkshire Constabulary has told me plainly that, if I cannot account for 1 hour of Thursday night, he means to arrest me for the murder of my uncle, Septimus Calder." The name was known to me. Septimus Calder had been one of those prosperous men whose fortune was built quietly enough that the public heard of him only when he purchased something large. He held interests in 2 provincial hotels, a brewery, and a railway catering concern. A brief newspaper paragraph had announced his death at the Greyfriar Hotel near Merriwick, adding that the circumstances were peculiar. Calder drew from his waistcoat pocket a small brass key and laid it on our table. "That," said he, "is what brought me to you." Holmes did not touch it at first. It was an undistinguished object, less than 2 inches long, with a round bow and shallow wards. One side was dull from age, the other bore a narrow, bright scrape. "The police?" Holmes asked. "Dismissed it. Bellairs, the under-manager at Greyfriar, said it belonged to an old cabinet long removed during alterations. Inspector Hale agreed that it could have no bearing upon a death in a room whose doors and windows were watched." "Where was it found?" "Under the curtain in the west drawing room." Holmes's fingers stopped above the key. "Begin there." Calder leaned forward. "For 6 nights before my uncle died, a man was seen in that drawing room when no man could have entered it." "Seen by whom?" "First by Miss Beatrice Cole, my uncle's companion, then by a chambermaid. On the 3rd night by Dr. Fenner. On Wednesday, the night before the murder, I saw him myself." "Describe him." "That is precisely the difficulty. We saw only a face and part of a shoulder beyond the edge of the red curtain. Pale face, black beard, very dark coat. The gas was low. Each sighting lasted seconds. Twice we ran into the room. No one was there. Doors? One from the hall, one to a morning room. Both were watched after the second appearance. The windows open upon a gravel terrace. A constable was placed outside on Wednesday and Thursday. No one passed him." Holmes picked up the key. "And your uncle?" "He was furious at first, then frightened. He said someone wished to drive him from Greyfriar. He refused to leave. Why? Calder hesitated. Because he had business there, said Holmes. Yes. He was examining the hotel accounts with his solicitor, Mr. Leonard Say. My uncle was the largest investor. He had found irregularities, though he would not tell me what they were. And the murder? Thursday night. I quarreled with him at 10:30. Everyone heard us. I said he had cheated my mother of money left by my grandfather. I was angry enough to say that he would not live to enjoy it. That was imprudent. It was worse than that. It was theatrical. Calder's mouth twisted. I have earned my living by saying things which sound better than they are. The police believe the habit extends to murder. I asked how Septimus Calder had died. Strangled. Dr. Fenner says with a cord or narrow strip of cloth. He was found at 6 minutes past midnight, beside his writing desk. At 2 minutes before midnight, the bell from the drawing room rang twice. Miss Cole heard it. So did Bellairs and 2 servants in the hall. At almost the same moment, the bearded stranger was seen behind the curtain. Holmes's eyes sharpened. By whom? Miss Cole and a footman. I was in the east corridor, and Inspector Hale says I had time to reach the drawing room by the side stair. My uncle was believed alive at 11:50 because Bellairs saw him cross the little courtyard from the library. He was certainly alive at 10:30 when I left him. The doctor thinks death occurred close to midnight. Thinks. Within half an hour either side, he says. The room was warm, and my uncle had taken wine. Holmes turned the brass key beneath the lamp. You said the police mean to arrest you. What besides your quarrel? My old stage trunk contains a black false beard. I returned secretly to my uncle's private sitting room after 11. I lied about it, and I knew of an old service stair in the east wing, because I once played hide-and-seek there as a child. I could not deny that Inspector Hale possessed a substantial case. Why did you return? Holmes asked. Calder's face changed. I took letters which belonged to my mother. I will show them to you, but not to the police unless I must. They concern no crime. Every secret in a murder house claims innocence, Holmes replied. Some even speak the truth. He rose and took his lens from the mantel. Under magnification, the key displayed tiny marks invisible to my unaided sight. A smear of amber substance near the stem, and caught in the inner curve of the bow, a thread of dark red fiber. Varnish, said I, fresh enough to retain dust upon its surface. And cloth. Mr. Calder, was the drawing-room curtain red, dark crimson? Holmes held the key by its stem and looked at our visitor. You have done well to bring this, not because it opens a door, but because someone wished the police to believe there was no door for it to open. Calder rose half from his chair. You will come? We shall take the 3:10 from Paddington, and if Hale arrests me before then, tell him, said Holmes, that I am interested in the man behind the curtain. Calder's strained expression almost softened. Holmes added, but do not tell him whether I mean the bearded man or the one who taught everyone when to look. That last sentence remained with me during our journey, though I did not then understand it. I had supposed that the extraordinary feature of the case was the watched room. Holmes, as usual, had already begun elsewhere. Chapter 2. Greyfriar after 11. Merwick lay beyond the busy lines of Reading, in a fold of low Berkshire country, where wet fields rose to dark belts of beach, and the church tower appeared and vanished between hedges as our hired fly climbed the road. By the time we reached the village, the rain had thinned to a mist. The Greyfriar Hotel stood at its western edge, a broad Georgian house of pale stone, with later additions running behind it like unequal wings. It had once been the country seat of the Ford family. A carved grey friar above the porch, weather-softened until his face had nearly disappeared, had given the hotel its modern name. Gas burned behind the fanlight. Somewhere within, a service bell rang once, was answered by another, and then all was still. A small, neat man met us in the entrance hall. His hair was iron grey at the temples, though his face was scarcely 40. He had a smooth manner, lowered voice, and a habit of inclining his head before he spoke, as if each sentence were confidential. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I am Miles Gresham, under manager. Mrs. Pike, the proprietor, is attending to a party delayed by the weather. Inspector Hale is in the west parlour. We have kept the drawing room locked." Thus, within an hour of our arrival, the man who would prove central to the case stood before us in the most useful of disguises. Not paint or false whiskers, but responsibility. He carried the hotel keys, knew which servant was where, and answered every question with the mild precision of a clerk balancing figures. Holmes handed him his coat. "You saw Mr. Calder at 11:50 on Thursday." Gresham's eyes moved once toward Adrian Calder, who had travelled separately and arrived before us. "I did." He crossed the little glass-roofed court from the library passage to the west corridor. He wore his dark evening coat and grey trousers. I said, "A bad night, sir," and he answered, "Bad enough." "You saw his face?" "Not clearly. He was turning away." "You recognized the voice?" "I recognized Mr. Calder." Holmes smiled. "That is not the same answer." The under-manager accepted the correction without visible resentment. I had no reason to doubt it was he. Was he carrying anything? "A folded newspaper, I think." "Did you note the time from your watch?" "From the hall clock when I returned. 10 minutes to 12. "Who wound that clock?" "I do, every Monday." "And the bell at 11:58? "The private call bell from the west drawing room. 2 pulls. Mr. Calder often rang twice when he wanted hot water before retiring." "Where were you then?" "In this hall with Mrs. Grigg, the housekeeper, and Thomas, the night porter. We were closing the day book. Miss Cole came down the west corridor immediately after the bell. She had seen the stranger." Holmes's gaze travelled upward. Over the reception desk ran an old-fashioned board of ivory labels and brass tremblers connected by wires to the principal rooms. The label West Drawing Room was slightly yellower than its neighbours. "An elderly system," he observed. "Older than the hotel. Most guests find it quaint. Old things are often useful because people cease to notice them." Gresham's expression did not change. Inspector Hale entered from a side room. He was a broad, sun-browned man, with a countryman's deliberate speech, and none of the vanity sometimes found in officials who resent London assistance. "I know your name, Mr. Holmes. I'm glad enough to hear any objection to my case before I make an arrest. But you'll find the walls solid, the windows watched, and young Calder's temper beyond dispute." "Then you have the advantage of me," Holmes said. "I have not yet found anything beyond dispute." Hale led us through a square inner hall to the west side of the house. The drawing-room door had been sealed with paper over the keyhole and latch. Before entering, Holmes examined the corridor. Opposite the door stood a marble-topped table with a vase of dried honesty. 20 feet farther on was the opening to the glass-roofed court. A heavy curtain closed the nearer end of a shallow window embrasure inside the room. I could see its crimson edge when Hale broke the seal. The chamber was long, high, and comfortably furnished without being fashionable. 2 tall windows faced the terrace. Between them stood a writing desk. Against the north wall hung a full-length portrait of Sir Alaric Ford, a lean 18th-century gentleman in a brown coat, one hand upon a book. The portrait occupied a recess, partly bordered by red hangings. At certain angles, the actual room curtain overlapped the painted drapery in the picture, so that the boundary between canvas and fabric was not immediately obvious in poor light. Hale pointed to the carpet beside the desk. The body lay there, head toward the fireplace, chair overturned, no weapon, no sign of robbery that we could discover. "Except," said Holmes. The inspector gave him a quick look. "Except some private account papers missing from a leather portfolio. We did not know that until this morning. Mr. Say says Calder kept notes of his own." Gresham, who had remained by the door, said quietly, "Mr. Calder was forever moving papers between rooms. It may mean nothing." Holmes crossed to the portrait. "And where precisely was the stranger seen?" Miss Cole, Hale explained, had stood in the corridor, looking through the partly open drawing-room door. The crimson curtain had concealed most of the recess. Beyond its edge she saw a black-bearded face, motionless for perhaps 2 seconds. She cried out. The footman, coming from the court, saw the same thing from a sharper angle. Both entered. The face was gone. "Windows watched?" "Constable outside from 11:30. He swears no one approached. Morning room door bolted on this side. Main door under observation. We searched chimney, cupboards, even under furniture." Holmes bent close to the portrait but did not touch it. "You removed the picture?" "No. Too large, and there was no reason. The wall behind is exterior masonry at this section." "Is it?" Hale frowned. "So the plans show." From the hall came a delicate double tremor of metal, one of the old call bells answering a guest. Gresham glanced instinctively toward it. "Your staff are trained to sound," said Holmes. "A hotel cannot run otherwise." "Quite." I saw Holmes's eye drop to the bottom of the crimson curtain, where a thick cord bound the fold. The tassel at its end was heavy with dust, except upon one narrow polished band, as though fingers had recently passed there, more often than ordinary use required. He straightened without comment. At dinner we met the remaining persons connected with the affair. Miss Beatrice Cole was a composed woman of 28, dark-haired and observant, whose grief showed itself less in tears than in the care with which she controlled every movement. Dr. Hugh Fenner, a ruddy village physician with iron spectacles, spoke firmly until the subject touched his estimate of the hour of death, when he became properly cautious. Leonard Say, the solicitor, was dry, thin, and exact. Adrian Calder looked ill beside them. Mrs. Pike, the proprietor, watched the group with the exhausted anger of a woman who sees scandal devour a business built over 20 years. Holmes ate little. He listened. At 11, Mrs. Pike ordered the public rooms closed to prevent curious guests from wandering toward the west corridor. I stood with Holmes in the hall as the porter lowered the gas. The old building changed character. Pipes clicked faintly. Wind rubbed a branch against an upper window. From far off came the first quarter from Merriwick Church, softened by mist. Then Miss Cole, who had been crossing the west corridor, stopped so abruptly that the book in her hand fell upon the carpet. "There," she said. Through the open doorway of the drawing room, Inspector Hale had unlocked it for our examination. A pale face seemed to hover beside the crimson fold. Black beard, white cheek, dark shoulder. I saw it as clearly as I saw Holmes. Hale ran forward. Adrian Calder followed. I reached the room seconds later. The curtain swung slightly, though no window was open. Behind it there was only wall, portrait, and empty air. Inspector Hale looked at Holmes with a hard satisfaction that was almost relief. "You see, Mr. Holmes, whatever else we are wrong about, there is a man in this house." Holmes had not crossed the threshold. He was listening to the last faint vibration of a bell wire somewhere behind the wall. "There is certainly something in this house," said he. "The question is whether we have yet seen it." Chapter 3. Varnish on Grey Kid. The next morning broke cold and clear. Sunlight entered the west drawing room with a frankness that made the previous night's apparition seem absurd, yet the room itself rewarded scrutiny. Holmes insisted that Inspector Hale, Watson, and he addressed me by surname when he wished precision, agree upon every fact before discussing an explanation. "The body first," he said. Dr. Fenner repeated his account. Septimus Calder had been found at 6 minutes past midnight by Miss Cole and Thomas the porter. He lay on his back beside the desk. There was a narrow bruise around the neck, darker on the left side, with a small abrasion beneath the jaw. His collar had been loosened. No cord remained. One hand was partly closed. The body was still warm. Rigor had not begun. A glass containing watered brandy stood on the desk. "Could he have died at 11:45? I asked. Fenner considered. "Yes, I could not exclude it. Nor could I swear he died at 11:58. The room was warm, he was a heavy man, and the interval was short." "Then the medical evidence does not give us midnight," Holmes said. "It merely fails to contradict it." Hale nodded. "The bell gives us midnight. The bell gives us a bell. The inspector smiled despite himself. We turned to the room. The 2 terrace windows had old brass catches and showed no scratches. A film of dust on the inner sill was broken only where Hale's men had tested it. The morning room door had been bolted from the drawing room side when the body was found. The corridor door had not been locked. An open door in an impossible room case, I remarked. Very inconsiderate of it, Holmes said. Near the desk, he dropped suddenly to one knee. The carpet was thick, but beneath the overturned chair, one leg had pressed a clean crescent into the pile. Beside it lay a grey kid glove, overlooked because it had partly slid under a low bookcase. Hale took a step. Holmes raised a hand. Whose? Miss Cole, summoned from the breakfast room, identified it as Calder's. He kept gloves in several coat pockets, and often removed one while writing. Holmes lifted it with forceps. On the outer edge of the thumb was a glossy amber smear. Varnish, I said, remembering the key, or something very like it. He held the glove near the window. Tiny red fibers clung to the sticky patch. Did Mr. Calder handle the curtain? Hale asked. Possibly, but we should first ask what in this room had been newly varnished. Mrs. Pike could think of nothing. The hotel decorator had finished work in the east wing a month before. No repair was authorized in the west drawing room. Holmes then examined Calder's clothes, which had been preserved by Hale in an adjoining room. Here my own training gave me a modest share in the inquiry. The dead man had worn patent evening shoes, dark coat, grey trousers, and a white shirt. Gresham's statement placed him crossing the little courtyard at 11:50. That court, though roofed with glass, had a strip of open guttering where rain drove in. On Thursday night, the flagstones had been wet, and the shortest route from the library passage to the west corridor crossed 6 feet of damp stone scattered with fine grit from the yard. Yet Calder's soles were dry. More than that, the narrow welt, where grit catches between leather and upper held only pale lint and the blue-grey dust of carpet. Doctor, said Holmes, you have earned your keep. I merely observed what was not there. The highest form of usefulness, when a witness has supplied what should have been. Hale's face grew grave. Then Bellairs may have been mistaken. Or Mr. Calder changed shoes. No slippers were found. Then we keep both possibilities. From the floor, Holmes turned to the portrait. In daylight, Sir Alaric Ford looked less formidable than in the gaslit room. The black-bearded stranger bore no obvious resemblance to him. The painted face was clean-shaven, save for a faint brown shadow at the chin. Holmes ran his lens along the carved lower frame. Do not touch. One screw head at the right lower corner shone pale brass. The remaining screws were brown with age. Recently turned, said Hale. Recently exposed, at least. Above the portrait, where the recess met the cornice, lay a shallow shelf of plaster molding. Holmes stood upon a chair and examined it. The dust was thick. At shoulder height, however, a web which stretched from frame to side molding had been torn in 2 places. Fresh, loose strands clung to the wood. There is no room for a man behind the picture, Hale protested. Perhaps not where you have looked. Holmes tapped the wall to left and right, then the frame, then the lower paneling. The sounds differed, but old houses contain hollows without containing criminals. He made no announcement. Mr. Holmes, said Hale, what of Calder's nephew? You've weakened Bellairs's sighting, but the young man admits he lied. We shall hear his lie before deciding whether it supports yours. Adrian Calder joined us reluctantly. He had left his uncle after their quarrel at 10:30 and gone to his room. At 11:10, he descended the east stair, passed through an unused schoolroom, and entered his uncle's private sitting room with a duplicate key he had kept since boyhood. What did you take? Holmes asked. Calder produced a packet of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. My mother wrote them to a man she intended to marry after my father died. My uncle stopped the marriage, and later used the letters to humiliate her. I wanted them destroyed. You did not destroy them. No, I found I could not. Why hide this from the police? Because I had threatened him, entered his room secretly, and removed property. I have spent enough of my life before audiences to know when an explanation sounds rehearsed. Hale examined the letters. Their dates were more than 20 years old. Whatever their moral importance, they did not bear upon the accounts. "Where were you between 11:40 and midnight?" he asked. "In the old billiard room, alone. Convenient. Disastrous, in fact." Holmes asked about the brass key. "I found it at 7 the next morning when I went to the drawing room after Hale had finished his first search. It lay half under the red curtain. Bellairs said it was rubbish from an old cabinet. Hale let me keep it because it did not fit any guest room lock." "Did you tell them about the bright scrape?" "I did not notice it. Nor the varnish." "No." Holmes looked toward the curtain. Its braided tie-back had been replaced since the night before. The tassel hung at knee-height, handsome and useless. He pulled the curtain open and closed several times, listening. The rings rasped along the brass pole. On the third movement, a faint answering click came from within the wall. Gresham appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of letters for Inspector Hale. "You heard that?" Holmes asked. "The old woodwork settles, sir." "Does it settle only when the curtain moves?" Gresham smiled faintly. "In Greyfriar, one learns not to quarrel with every sound." Holmes took one of the envelopes from the tray, read the postmark without opening it, and gave it to Hale. "Reading," he said. "From Mr. Say's firm, perhaps." The solicitor's face tightened when he saw it. "Yes. I asked for a copy of Mr. Calder's will." "Why a copy?" Hale asked. "You have the original here. I have a draft codicil. The executed will is in London." Adrian turned toward him. "Codicil?" Say folded his hands. "Professional confidence prevented me from speaking before. Mr. Calder intended to alter his dispositions." "To whom?" "That is a matter for the proper authorities." "Everything is a matter for the proper authorities after a murder," Hale said. The solicitor looked at Miss Cole, who had entered behind Gresham, her face drained of color. There, by noon of our first full day, the case gained what Inspector Hale had lacked. Not one motive, but several. Holmes alone seemed less interested in who would inherit than in the old woodwork that clicked when the curtain moved. Chapter 4. What the Witnesses Heard. Holmes spent the afternoon in a manner which would have disappointed anyone expecting dramatic detection. He asked people to repeat themselves. Miss Beatrice Cole came first. She had served Septimus Calder for 4 years, initially as secretary and later as companion, after rheumatism made long travel difficult for him. She was intelligent enough to distinguish memory from conclusion when Holmes pressed her. "The first time I saw the man," she said, "I was at the far end of the west corridor. The drawing-room door was half open. I heard a light knocking, 3 taps, then a pause. When I looked in, there was a face beyond the curtain." "Did the face move?" "I thought the eyes moved." "Thought? I cannot swear it." "Did you see a body enter or leave?" "No." "Did you hear footsteps?" "A soft scrape." "I assumed it was a shoe." "Good. What did you actually hear?" "A scrape. On the murder night, she had been in her room until about 11:45. She came downstairs because Calder had asked her to bring a packet of correspondence before he retired. At the top of the west stair, she heard 2 clear pulls of the drawing-room bell. Almost immediately came the scrape and a faint metallic tick. Through the open door, she saw the bearded face. "Did you see Mr. Calder alive after 10:30? "No. Bellairs said he had just crossed from the library." "Did you hear Mr. Calder speak?" "No." "Did anyone?" She considered. Bellairs said Mr. Calder answered him in the court. That distinction interested Holmes more than any emotion in her account. The chambermaid, Alice Drew, had seen the stranger 2 nights earlier. She heard the curtain rings whisper along the pole, looked in, and saw the same black beard. A footman named Thomas Keene described the final sighting. He had been carrying coal along the court passage when the drawing-room bell trembled on the hall board. Miss Cole cried out. Thomas looked through the doorway and saw a dark gentleman behind the red. He did not see the figure move. Dr. Fenner's sighting had occurred on Tuesday. He had been leaving after a consultation when he heard a small click, like a billiard ball gently touching another. He glanced into the room and saw the face. Being a practical man, he searched the windows himself. "You were attending Mr. Calder for the heart?" I asked. Fenner's mouth tightened. "For indigestion, chiefly. Yet you told Miss Cole he should avoid excitement." All eyes turned to him. He removed his spectacles and polished them. "Mr. Calder had occasional palpitations, nothing that caused death. His neck marks are decisive." "Why conceal the condition?" Holmes asked. "Because Calder concealed something else. He had been taking chloral hydrate without my direction when he could not sleep. I discovered it last month and warned him. If the police found the bottle, they might suppose I had prescribed the quantity." Hale grunted. "Where is the bottle?" "Missing from his room. It was a genuine secret, and an ugly one, but no chloral had caused the bruised throat. Fenner had lied to protect his professional reputation, not to disguise the murder." Leonard Say was more difficult. The solicitor seemed to regard every question as a possible precedent. "The codicil?" said Holmes. "Whom did it favor?" "Miss Cole was to receive £5,000 and an annuity. The bulk of the estate remained as before." Adrian Calder sat very still. "Did Mr. Calder intend to disinherit his nephew?" "No." "Did Mr. Calder know you had advanced money to Adrian Calder during the past year?" Say's eyes flickered. Adrian looked sharply at him. "How did you know that?" Holmes touched the blotting paper on the table. "Mr. Say wrote two figures while waiting, 300 and 175. Men do not doodle such sums unless they are worried by them." The solicitor admitted the advances. They were personal loans, made without Septimus Calder's knowledge. He feared that disclosure would end a lucrative professional connection. "So you had reason to wish your client less inquisitive," Hale observed. "I had reason to wish Mr. Adrian Calder more solvent." "And where were you at midnight?" "In my room, writing a letter. The maid collected it at 12:10. No one could confirm the earlier minutes." Finally came Miles Gresham. He entered with a ledger under his arm and sat where Holmes indicated. He answered smoothly. "Hotel employee for 11 years. Under manager for 6. Responsible for evening accounts, staffing, keys, and the closing routine." Septimus Calder had questioned him over supplier invoices, but had made no accusation. "Had he discovered theft?" Holmes asked. "I cannot say." "Could you lose your position?" "Any employee may." "Could you enter the west drawing room without using its doors or windows?" "No." "Is there an old service passage behind the north wall?" "Not to my knowledge. There are boxed pipes and a disused flue. The original house was altered before my time." "Before your time at the hotel, perhaps, not before your time in Merriwick." For the first time, Gresham paused. "I was born 3 miles away." "You played here as a boy?" "No." Holmes laid the brass key on the table. "You identified this as an old cabinet key. It resembles one." "Which cabinet?" "The old stationery press removed from the west corridor." "When?" 5 years ago." "Where is the press now?" "Broken up, I believe." "Then we shall not test your memory upon it." Gresham gave a courteous inclination of the head. "Your sighting of Mr. Calder at 11:50, Holmes continued. "You did not see his face. You say he spoke. Repeat his exact words." "Bad enough." "In what tone?" "His ordinary tone." "Loud?" "No." "Could another man have said it?" "Any man can say 2 words, Mr. Holmes." "Precisely." After he left, Hale exhaled through his nose. "You suspect him?" "I suspect every statement which pretends to be an observation." "What do you make of the face?" I asked. Holmes rose and took us to the drawing room. He placed me in Miss Cole's position in the corridor, and Hale where the footman had stood. The gas was lowered to the level described on Thursday. The portrait darkened. The real crimson curtain overlapped its left edge. "Watson, tell me what you see." Sir Alaric's face. "Now close one eye." I did so. "Move 2 feet to your right." The painted face slipped partly behind the curtain. At that angle, the edge of the fabric cut away one cheek and shoulder, making the figure seem deeper in the recess than it was. "A portrait may be mistaken for a man," Hale said, "but the portrait has no black beard." Holmes glanced at the frame. "That is the useful part." He did not explain further. That evening I formed a theory of my own. Adrian Calder possessed stage skill, a false beard, knowledge of the old wing, motive from the family quarrel, and an admitted secret journey after 11. He might have manufactured the earlier sightings to frighten his uncle, then used the confusion to conceal a murder. The key might belong to some forgotten theatrical arrangement he had remembered from childhood. His very decision to bring Holmes into the case could be the boldness of a man who believed the mechanism safe. I laid this before Holmes as we smoked in my room. "It is a good theory," he said. "You mean wrong. I mean good. It explains motive, skill, and suspicious conduct. It even explains why a bearded stranger should look theatrical. But it does not explain Calder's dry shoes, the fresh screw, the varnish, the broken webs, or why the bell rang when it did. Those may belong to the same arrangement. They may, but your actor does not control the hotel's ordinary habits." From somewhere below us came the muted jingle of keys, followed by Gresham's low voice, directing a servant to latch the side entrance. Holmes listened until the sound died away. "The dramatic suspect," he said, "is often less interesting than the man who decides which doors are routinely opened, which bells are answered, and which times everyone accepts without looking at a watch." Chapter 5. The Face That Did Not Move. By the following morning, the impossible visitor had appeared 4 times in the recollection of witnesses, and once before my own eyes. I confess that this last fact troubled me. It is easy to dismiss another man's glimpse as imagination. It is less comfortable to distrust one's own. Holmes seemed in excellent spirits. He borrowed a carpenter's screwdriver from the hotel workshop, a length of black thread from Mrs. Grigg, and a hand mirror from Miss Cole. Then he shut himself in the west drawing room for 20 minutes and refused us entry. When he emerged, he asked Inspector Hale to summon those who had seen the stranger. Gresham came as well, standing modestly at the back. "Miss Cole," said Holmes, "take your original place in the corridor. Thomas, stand near the court. Dr. Fenner, remain beside me. Mr. Calder, lower the gas until Miss Cole says it matches Thursday." The room sank into amber shadow. Holmes closed the crimson curtain until only a narrow opening exposed part of the portrait. Sir Alaric's pale face floated between red cloth and darkness. "Now," said Holmes. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then came the faint click I had heard before. A dark line moved across the painted chin. It widened, curved, and in an instant, the clean-shaven Ford had become the black-bearded stranger. Miss Cole gave a low cry. Thomas swore under his breath. Holmes raised the gas. The beard remained. He stepped to the portrait, and using the screwdriver, removed the one bright screw. A narrow section of carved molding loosened. Behind the outer glazing lay a second, extremely thin plate of glass, painted only in selected areas. A black beard, darker brows, a wedge of coat, and a shadow along one cheek. The plate ran upon 2 minute brass guides, hidden within the frame. A cord attached to its lower corner passed through a drilled channel in the wood and disappeared behind the paneling. "The stranger," said Hale slowly, "was paint, partly. The witnesses saw a real face, the portrait. They saw real movement, the sliding glass. They heard a real scrape, the guide. They added one assumption, that the face belonged to a living man standing behind the curtain." Gresham stepped closer. "Extraordinary. Who could have fitted such a thing?" Holmes looked at him. Someone with patience, ordinary tools, and privacy. The under-manager bent toward the frame but did not touch it. "That might include half the hotel. Not half. We shall narrow it." The illusion, once exposed, seemed simple enough, yet it had been beautifully adapted to the room. The actual curtain hid the edge of the portrait and prevented a witness from seeing the frame clearly. Low gas erased the shine of the second glass. The altered features were bold enough to register at 20 feet, but crude when examined closely. Holmes lifted the glass plate with gloved fingers. Along one wooden guide, the varnish was fresh and tacky. "The glove," I said. Calder must have handled the frame or cord shortly before his death. Perhaps he had discovered the trick. The key bears the same varnish. Hale turned to Adrian. And you found the key under the curtain? Yes. It may have fallen during the struggle. From whom? That remains our difficulty. Holmes knelt at the lower paneling. The brass key entered a nearly invisible keyhole beneath a carved leaf. When turned, it released a spring catch. A strip of panel 2 feet wide opened inward by less than an inch before striking something behind it. Blocked, Hale said. Holmes inserted his hand mirror into the gap and angled it. There is a cavity, and beyond it a narrow passage. The panel cannot open fully because a crate has been placed behind it from the other side. Gresham's mild voice came from behind us. There is an old pipe space accessible from the linen room. I had forgotten that it approached so near. Holmes turned his head. You told me there was no service passage to your knowledge. I said there were boxed pipes and a disused flue. If the space extends behind this wall, I was mistaken. Have you entered it? Never. Hale sent Thomas and a constable to the linen room. After several minutes, we heard dragging and muffled voices within the wall. The panel opened. Behind it lay a passage scarcely 2 feet wide, floored in rough boards and thick with old dust. A large packing crate had indeed been pushed against the drawing room panel. We entered one by one. I was behind Holmes. The air smelled of dry plaster, mouse droppings and old wood. At shoulder level, several cobwebs had been freshly broken. Lower down, the dust preserved confused marks, where something had been dragged. The cord from the portrait passed through a small pulley and ran 10 feet along the passage. Near its end hung a brass weight. Beside it, on a nail, was a stub of candle and a loop of fine cotton blackened at one point. Hale touched neither. A delayed pull, I said. Holmes's eyes shone. Perhaps. The inspector looked from candle to cord. You could set the weight, burn the thread, and let it fall. If the timing were known. How long? Holmes examined the candle but did not answer. At the farther end of the passage, where it opened into a disused linen closet, we found a shallow tray of tools: screwdriver, glass cutter, small brush, and a stoppered bottle smelling of varnish. None bore a name. Gresham stood at the closet door. Any servant might come here. Would they? Holmes asked Mrs. Grigg. The housekeeper shook her head. Not unless ordered. That closet holds broken stands and old blankets. Mr. Gresham keeps the key to this service side because guests sometimes wander. The under-manager's face remained composed, as does Mrs. Pike. 2 official keys, said Hale, and 1 small brass key found under the curtain, Holmes added. The inspector's attention hardened toward Gresham, but Holmes was not yet ready to accuse. The illusion is solved, I said when we returned to the drawing room. Surely the rest follows. No, said Holmes. We have solved how a dead man in oil paint became a living stranger. We have not solved why Septimus Calder died, when he died, or who stood with him. Mechanism is not identity. At that moment, a messenger arrived from the village police station with a note for Hale. The inspector read it twice. What is it? I asked. We searched Adrian Calder's room at his own invitation. In the bottom of his stage trunk, we found a coil of black cord. The doctor says its width corresponds to the mark on the dead man's neck. There is also a false beard and a pair of soft-soled shoes. Adrian's face went rigid. Hale looked at Holmes with genuine regret. You asked for a persuasive explanation, sir. I fear I have one. Chapter 6. The cord in the actor's trunk. Inspector Hale was not a man to arrest for effect. He took the black cord from Adrian Calder's trunk, placed it beside the measurement Dr. Fenner had made of the bruise, and asked the actor to explain it. It is stage cord, Adrian said. I have had it for years. It flew a cloth in a touring production of The Iron Crown. The beard is stage property. So are the felt shoes. You understand how that sounds. I have understood nothing else for 2 days. The cord was a little more than 3 yards long, tarred black and supple from use. Fenner laid it gently against a paper tracing of the mark on Septimus Calder's neck. "The width is close," he admitted. Hale looked at Holmes. "We have a man who threatened the dead man, returned secretly after 11, owns a false beard matching the apparition, knows old passages, and possesses a cord of the correct width. We now know the stranger was an artificial effect. An actor is better placed than most men to devise one." "And the key?" Holmes asked. "He may have dropped it. And the hotel bell? He may have rigged it through the passage. And Gresham's sighting at 11:50. Gresham may be honestly mistaken." It was, I confess, a powerful construction. My own theory of the previous evening returned with renewed force. Adrian's only answer was that he had never seen the portrait mechanism until Holmes exposed it. Hale pointed out that this was exactly what a guilty man would say. The inspector therefore asked him to remain under supervision in an upstairs room while he applied for formal authority from the local magistrate. Holmes did not protest. Instead, he asked Fenner for his magnifying glass and examined the black cord fiber by fiber. "A rough hemp core," he said. "The neck abrasion is smooth-edged, except for one small graze under the left jaw. Doctor, when you cleaned that graze, did you preserve anything?" Fenner colored. "A few fibers on lint. I kept them because the police had not yet found a ligature." He fetched a folded paper from his medical bag. Within were 3 almost colorless filaments. "Silk," I said after examining them. "Or a fine mercerized thread," Holmes replied. "Certainly not this tarred hemp." Hale's brows met. "Then the cord in the trunk is wrong." "Wrong as a ligature, very right as a temptation. You think it was planted?" Adrian asked. "No. Your stage trunk is full of stage things. A false solution requires no planting when a man has spent half his life collecting evidence against himself." For the first time since Baker Street, Adrian laughed naturally. Hale still had ample reason to hold him. The false beard remained awkward, the quarrel real, and his secret movements unexplained to anyone who did not accept the old letters at face value. Holmes then asked Miss Cole to walk with us in the garden. The rain had passed, and the beech leaves made a copper mat beside the path. "You knew about the letters," he said. She looked toward the hotel windows. "Yes." "You also knew Mr. Adrian Calder intended to take them?" "Yes." "Because you are engaged to him." Her composure failed for a moment. "Who told you?" "No one. Your concern for his arrest is not the concern of a secretary for an employer's nephew. You wear no ring, but there is a pale line on the 3rd finger where one has been removed. Adrian wears a chain at his neck with something small beneath the shirt. I assume its companion is in your pocket." She produced a plain gold ring. "My uncle opposed it," Adrian said later when Hale confronted him. "He considered the stage disreputable and Beatrice socially inconvenient. We meant to marry whether he approved or not." This secret gave the pair a reason to lie and a shared fear of Septimus Calder, but it also explained why Adrian had risked returning for his mother's letters. He believed those letters contained a statement by his mother, which would soften an old family quarrel before the marriage became public. By 5 o'clock, Hale's neat case had become untidy again. It became worse at 6. Leonard Say came down the main stair with his usually bloodless face flushed dark red. He carried an empty leather portfolio. "My account abstract is gone." "What abstract?" Hale demanded. "The memorandum Calder gave me on Thursday afternoon. 4 pages in his hand. Hotel receipts, supplier totals, private notes. I locked it in this portfolio after his death. The portfolio was inside my traveling case." The case was locked. "Who knew you had it?" Holmes asked. "You did. Inspector Hale. Miss Cole may have seen it. Calder knew, of course. Anyone else?" Say hesitated. "Calder asked Bellairs to bring 2 account books while I was with him. Bellairs saw the memorandum on the table. Hale sent for Gresham. The under-manager arrived from the office and listened with concern. A theft inside Greyfriar is intolerable. My master keys are in my pocket and have not left me." "May I see them?" Holmes asked. Gresham handed over a ring of 7 keys. Holmes examined each, then returned them. "Your room key, Mr. Say." The solicitor produced it. There was no mark on the lock. No window had been forced. A maid had seen Saye leave his room at 5:20 and return at 5:50. During that half hour, Adrian Calder had been under police watch. The stolen pages changed the atmosphere more effectively than any apparition. A murderer of family passion might conceal a quarrel or destroy a will. Someone who removed an account abstract while the chief suspect was guarded had a colder interest. We searched until dinner. Nothing was found. At 8, a maid clearing ashes from a small service grate behind the office discovered a blackened fragment of paper. Most of it crumbled at a touch, but in one corner remained 3 figures in Calder's hand and part of a word, lawned. Gresham stood beside the grate when Hale showed it to us. "The laundry accounts," he said softly. "Mr. Calder complained of them last week." Holmes looked up. That detail was not on the fragment. Gresham's face remained perfectly still. "Mr. Calder complained of many accounts. I happen to remember that one." "Of course," said Holmes. He placed the burned scrap in an envelope. When Gresham had gone, Hale shut the office door. He knew too much. "Perhaps," Holmes replied. "But knowledge in an undermanager is not yet guilt. We still require the bridge between accounts, passage, and time." From upstairs, precisely at 9, the hotel clock gave a mellow stroke. Holmes took out his watch, compared it, and smiled in a manner which told me that one part of that bridge was already forming. Chapter 7. The Laundry Account. The financial inquiry occupied most of the next day and showed me another side of Holmes's method. There were no footprints to measure and no ashes to classify. Instead, there were columns of figures, supplier names, signatures, and the ordinary dullness behind which large thefts commonly conceal themselves. Septimus Calder had invested in Greyfriar 12 years before. Mrs. Pike managed the house. Miles Gresham handled much of the daily administration. Payments below a certain sum required only the under-manager's entry and the proprietor's weekly approval. In a busy hotel, coal, laundry, candles, repairs, wines, and carriage hire produced hundreds of small charges. Holmes compared 3 years of books and selected 27 entries. "Why those?" I asked. "Because they repeat without appearing to repeat." The Merriwick steam laundry charged irregular sums, as one would expect. But every 5th or 6th week, a second amount appeared for special linen, always just below the threshold that required Calder's countersignature. Similar charges appeared under 2 repair firms. The totals were small individually and formidable in accumulation. Saye produced bank correspondence showing that one supposed repair firm had ceased trading 4 years earlier. Mrs. Pike sat down heavily. "I signed those books. You signed what your under-manager placed before you after 16 hours of work," Holmes said. "That is not careful, but it is human." "Bellairs," she began, then corrected herself. "Gresham has served me 11 years, which gave him time to learn where routine becomes invisible." Hale traced the sums with a thick forefinger. "You think Calder discovered it?" "I think he was close enough to frighten whoever did it." The name laundry on the burned fragment now had meaning. So did Saye's stolen abstract. Miss Cole supplied another piece. 2 weeks before his death, Septimus Calder had asked her to copy several invoice numbers into a private notebook. He had then locked the notebook in a black leather ledger which he carried between London and Greyfriar. "Where is that ledger?" Holmes asked. "No one has found it." "Did Gresham know of it?" "He came in once while Mr. Calder was writing in it. My employer closed the cover at once." "Did Calder say anything?" "He said, 'Tomorrow we'll settle it.' That was Thursday afternoon." Immediate pressure, as Holmes later observed, is often the invisible hand behind an otherwise unnecessary crime. A thief may continue for years until one morning's audit turns patience into desperation. We examined Gresham's office with Mrs. Pike's consent and Hale's authority. There were duplicate keys, staff rotas, invoices, supplier letters, and a small cash box. Nothing criminal lay openly among them. A blotting pad showed recent calculations, but ordinary hotel business could explain each one. In a lower drawer, I found a card from a London glass merchant. Holmes read it and returned it without expression. The card advertised picture glass cut to measure and delivered by rail. Gresham, when questioned, said the hotel had ordered replacement glass for 2 bedrooms after a storm. True, Mrs. Pike confirmed. 1 pane was cracked. Again, an apparently significant fact possessed an innocent explanation. Holmes seemed pleased rather than disappointed. We must not prosecute coincidences, he told me. Toward afternoon, he returned to the hidden passage. Hale and I followed. Holmes crawled the full length, measuring from the linen closet to the portrait panel. Near the place where the webs had been torn, he paused at a rough nail projecting from a brace. From it he removed with tweezers a short twist of black wool, carrying a tiny green filament. He folded it into paper and marked the packet. "From a coat?" I asked. "From something woven. We shall not make it more specific until comparison permits." At the portrait, the operating cord had been routed through the frame and down beside the curtain tieback. Close inspection showed that one strand had been passed beneath the tassel so that a pull from behind the wall moved the glass, without visibly drawing the curtain itself. "Whoever designed it understood what a witness would notice," I said, "and what a servant would ignore," Holmes answered. The delayed mechanism in the passage interested him most. The brass weight could be raised and held by a loop of cotton. A candle placed beneath the loop would eventually burn it through. When released, the weight pulled the portrait plate sideways. A second branch of cord ran upward toward the old bell-wire conduit. Hale whistled. So one falling weight could move the glass and ring the drawing-room bell. "Yes." "How long after lighting?" Holmes looked at the candle stub. "That is the question which matters more than the face." He spent the next hour in the unused schoolroom, with candles borrowed from the same hotel store, lengths of cotton from the same sewing basket, and a watch upon the table. He varied the distance of flame from thread, the thickness of the loop, and the angle at which the wick burned. I watched 3 failures. One thread parted in 9 minutes. Another lasted 23. The third guttered and went out. "Your mechanism is not exact," I said. "No crude device is exact until one knows how it was prepared." He examined the blackened loop recovered from the passage and rubbed it between finger and thumb. "Waxed," he said, "not plain cotton." He drew a fresh thread lightly across the side of the candle, coating it with wax, reset the apparatus, and struck a match. We waited. The room was so quiet that I heard the faint scratch of Hale's pencil and the distant clatter of crockery from the kitchen passage. At 14 minutes and a few seconds, the thread separated. The weight dropped. A chair leg jerked where Holmes had tied the cord in imitation of the portrait slide. Hale looked at his watch. 14 minutes. Holmes extinguished the candle. "Now," said he, "we can begin to speak about Thursday night." Chapter 8. 14 minutes missing. Holmes would not allow Inspector Hale to arrest Gresham that evening. "We possess motive," Hale argued. "We possess access. He lied about the passage. He knew the laundry account was on the burned paper. What more do you want? Proof that survives a clever solicitor. We have the mechanism. We have a mechanism accessible from a service closet for which 2 official keys exist, and a third key lay in the room. We have a financial pattern handled by several people. We have a lie about Calder crossing the court, unless Gresham was merely mistaken. And we have a fragment of wool which I have not yet compared. It is enough for suspicion, not enough for the kind of accusation I intend to make." Hale accepted this with reluctance. Holmes then assembled us in the hall and reconstructed the chronology without naming the murderer. "At 10:30, he began. "Septimus Calder quarreled with his nephew. That is certain. Between 11:10 and 11:30, Adrian entered the private sitting room and took letters. That is also admitted. Around 11:40, Calder expected a private interview connected with the hotel accounts. We know this because Miss Cole had copied figures for him, and because Saye says the audit was to continue next morning. The official story then places Calder alive at 11:50, crossing the damp court, but the only witness to that is Mr. Gresham, who did not see the man's face. Watson has shown that Calder's shoes had not crossed wet stone. Therefore, the 11:50 sighting is not a confirmed fact. At 11:58, the drawing room bell rang twice, and the stranger appeared. Everyone treated the bell as proof that Calder was alive. It was nothing of the kind. The candle apparatus could be set earlier and left to act later. We reproduced a delay of 14 minutes using the same waxed thread. Miss Cole's hand went to her throat. Then he could have been dead when I heard the bell. Yes. At 11:44, I said. Holmes glanced at me approvingly. Approximately. The killer could finish the attack, set the weight, leave through the hidden passage, and be visibly elsewhere before the false signal occurred at 11:58. Hale turned toward Gresham, who stood by the desk with his hands loosely folded. The under-manager's voice remained low. Or Adrian Calder could do exactly that. A fair objection, Holmes said. Adrian made an angry movement, but I caught his arm. Holmes continued. The public version is that an unknown bearded man entered a watched room. The police version is that Adrian Calder, with theatrical skill and family motive, manufactured the apparition and killed his uncle. The actual mechanism disproves the first version, but does not, by itself, disprove the second. That is why we are not finished. He pointed to the call bell board. The murderer used what this house supplied. Old wires, service passages, a room whose lighting could be controlled, and a staff trained to attach meaning to a bell. The most important false assumption was not that the door was locked. It was that the ring at 11:58 came from a living hand. Gresham's eyes moved toward the west corridor. Holmes saw it. After the meeting, he asked Mrs. Pike whether Gresham owned more than one black frock coat. She thought not. The under-manager dressed soberly and wore the same good coat for evening duty, replacing it only when necessary. At dinner, I noticed a small repair at Gresham's right shoulder seam, where black wool had been drawn together with dark green silk. It might have escaped me had Holmes not shown me the fragment from the passage. I said nothing. Later, in our room, Holmes placed the fragment beside a thread obtained from the hotel tailor, who had repaired Gresham's coat 10 days earlier. Under the lens, the green strands possessed the same flattened twist. Not absolute proof, I said. No, cloth is manufactured by the yard, but observe the black fiber. A minute glossy speck adhered to it. Varnish. The same amber color as the frame guide. Our visitor to the passage brushed the wet wood at shoulder height. That explains the broken webs and the torn thread. Gresham denies ever entering the space. Then why not arrest him? Because I want him to tell us which danger he fears most. Holmes took out a telegraph form and wrote a message to his own address in Baker Street. It read, Calder press copy found with London papers. Complete abstract, including laundry and repair accounts, to be delivered Baker Street, Monday 6. Say you are sending a telegram to yourself? I asked. Through Mr. Say's clerk, with Say's consent. The wording is true in part. A press copy of several account notes has been found in London, though it is incomplete. Gresham need not know the limitation. And how will he know of the message? Mr. Say will ask the hotel office to send it. The under-manager controls outgoing telegrams after 5. You expect him to open it. I expect him to do what his established habits permit. Perhaps he will read the office copy. Perhaps he will ask a clerk. Perhaps he will take no action at all, in which case, we rely on the evidence already gathered. Holmes leaned back. A trap, Watson, should not manufacture a criminal act. It should offer an existing fear a chance to reveal itself. The next morning, Say's message was sent. Gresham himself handed the stamped office copy back to the solicitor. At noon, Mrs. Pike announced that Gresham had requested leave for Monday afternoon to attend to family business in London. Holmes said only, "Excellent." Chapter 9. The 6 o'clock packet. We returned to London on Monday morning. Inspector Hale followed by a later train with Adrian Calder and Leonard Say, while Miss Cole came at Adrian's request. Gresham was not invited by Holmes. That omission was deliberate. At 5:30, our sitting room in Baker Street held an unusual gathering. Hale sat near the window. Say occupied the hard chair by the bookcase. Adrian and Miss Cole stood together by the fire. On the table lay the painted glass plate wrapped in felt, the brass key, the grey kid glove, the packet of fibers, and the charred scrap from the hotel grate. Mrs. Hudson brought tea and regarded the collection with the tolerance of one long accustomed to stranger objects. "Will he come?" Hale asked when she had gone. "If he believes the account abstract threatens him, and if he does not, then we proceed without theatre." Adrian smiled faintly, a severe remark in my presence. At 10 minutes to 6, the street bell rang once. Mrs. Hudson showed in Miles Gresham. He wore the same black frock coat I had studied at Greyfriar. He carried gloves and a small leather document case. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "Mrs. Pike asked me to bring the corrected hotel totals for Inspector Hale. I understood there might be some conclusion today. Very considerate." Gresham looked around the room and appeared mildly surprised to see the others. "I had not expected a conference." "Nor had I," Holmes said, "until a missing document was recovered." For the first time, a visible change passed over the under-manager's face. It was small, a tightening at the corners of the mouth, gone at once. The clock on our mantel showed 3 minutes to 6. Holmes began not with Gresham, but with Miss Cole. "You saw a face behind a curtain. The face was painted. You heard a scrape. It was glass moving on a guide. You heard Calder's call bell. It was a falling weight, pulling an old wire. Every perception was genuine. The error lay in joining them into a living intruder at 11:58. He uncovered the painted plate and held it against the light. The murderer had spent several evenings teaching the household a story. A bearded stranger appeared, vanished, and appeared again. Therefore, when the bell rang on Thursday and the altered portrait became visible, no one asked whether the room contained a living man. The answer had been rehearsed in their minds. Gresham stood very still. "Mr. Holmes," Say said. "The packet?" "Ah, yes." Holmes crossed to his desk and took out a thick sealed envelope marked Calder, Private Accounts. He placed it upon the table beside the brass key. "I have not yet opened the complete press copy in the presence of the police. Inspector Hale wished first to hear how the crime was physically possible." That statement was carefully worded. Hale knew the envelope contained only blank paper and a few copied figures. Gresham did not. Holmes continued for several minutes, describing the passage and the delayed chord. I noticed Gresham's eyes return again and again to the envelope. Then Mrs. Hudson entered with a note, exactly as Holmes had arranged. He read it and rose. "Hale, a word in the bedroom, if you please. Mr. Say, come also. Watson, remain with our friends." I understood my part. Holmes had told me to prevent anyone from leaving, but to interfere with nothing else unless there was danger. The 3 men withdrew. Adrian and Miss Cole spoke quietly by the window. Gresham remained near the table. For perhaps 20 seconds he did nothing. Then the hall door below slammed as Mrs. Hudson admitted a delivery boy. Gresham moved. He did not seize the envelope. That would have been too crude. Instead, he took the brass key in his left hand, as though examining it, shifted the envelope beneath his document case, and with a practiced movement, drew both toward the edge of the table. "Mr. Gresham," I said. He looked at me. "Your case is open." It was not. For one instant, his attention went to it nevertheless. Adrian stepped forward. The envelope had already slipped half beneath Gresham's leather case. Holmes re-entered. "That will do." Gresham's hand closed upon the table edge. "You wished me to take it. I wished to learn whether you considered it dangerous enough to take. This is entrapment. No, you were not invited. You came because the office copy of a telegram told you a record of the thefts would be here. You attempted to remove it because you believe the accounts condemn you. The act proves fear, not murder. For murder, we have other evidence." Inspector Hale came in behind Holmes. Gresham took one step backward and stopped. There was no route past Hale, no need for pursuit, and perhaps no remaining belief in escape. Holmes held up the small paper packet from the hidden passage. This fiber was caught on a nail beyond the portrait. Black wool, with a green repair thread, carrying a speck of the same varnish found on Calder's glove and on the sliding guide. Your coat has a repaired tear at the right shoulder, made with that green silk. The tear aligns with the height of the broken webs. You told us you had never entered the passage. Gresham's gaze dropped involuntarily to his shoulder. Holmes picked up the grey glove. Calder found the trick. He handled the frame, acquiring wet varnish. That is why you had to act on Thursday before he and Mr. Say completed the audit. Your painted stranger was meant to provide the unknown intruder. Your delayed bell was meant to provide the wrong time. Your statement about seeing Calder cross the wet court was meant to strengthen that time. His dry shoes exposed the lie. Gresham's composure cracked at last. You cannot prove the money came to me. Saye opened his case. We can prove where several payments went. The bank has traced 2 of the supposed suppliers to an account opened under a name used by your late father. This evidence had arrived that morning and, as Holmes later insisted, established the financial theft rather than the murder. It was not necessary to explain the mechanism, but it closed the motive. Gresham looked from one face to another. Then he did a curious thing. He touched the brass key. I lost that on Thursday, he said. Silence followed. Hale spoke first. You told us it belonged to a cabinet broken up 5 years ago. Gresham closed his eyes. It was the smallest of mistakes. Yet no confession could have been clearer. He had corrected the wrong detail because fear had exhausted caution. Inspector Hale stepped forward. Miles Gresham, I am arresting you for the murder of Septimus Calder. There was no struggle. The soft-spoken under-manager held out his wrists and said, almost apologetically, I should like my coat before we go. You are wearing it, Holmes replied. Chapter 10. The Stranger Behind the Curtain. After Hale had taken Gresham away, the tension which had held our little room broke in different fashions. Miss Cole wept quietly. Adrian stood with both hands upon the mantel, staring into the fire. Saye asked 3 practical questions about the custody of documents. Holmes lit his pipe. I waited until Mrs. Hudson had closed the door behind the last visitor. There are still points, I said. There are always points, Watson. The question is whether they are loose. You have explained the false stranger and the false time. I should like the whole sequence. Holmes settled into his chair. Begin with Gresham's position. He was not a dramatic man. That is precisely why the case was nearly successful. For years he had taken small sums from Greyfriar by creating or reviving supplier accounts, which Mrs. Pike signed in routine. Septimus Calder began comparing invoices. The private ledger and Saye's abstract threatened exposure, prosecution, and the ruin of the respectable identity Gresham valued above the money itself. He could not simply steal the ledger while Calder watched him, nor could he murder Calder in an ordinary fashion and expect suspicion to avoid the hotel staff. So he created an intruder in advance. The painted glass. Yes, he had picture glass available through legitimate hotel repairs. He painted only what distance and poor gaslight required. Beard, brow, cheek shadow, part of a coat. He fitted the plate into the old portrait frame with fresh guides. The bright screw showed recent work. The varnish on the guide later transferred to Calder's glove and to Gresham's coat in the passage. Each earlier appearance trained the witnesses. A scrape, a moving plate, perhaps a tap on the wall, and then the altered face partly hidden by the curtain. No witness lied. None was foolish. They saw selected truths from bad angles. And the hidden route. The old service space ran from the linen closet behind the portrait. Gresham knew it because his duties included the service side of the building. However firmly he denied it. The broken cobwebs at shoulder height proved recent passage. The wool fiber on the nail linked that passage to his repaired coat. The brass key released the spring catch in the panel. He dropped it during the night and then tried to dismiss it as refuse when Adrian found it. I remembered the red curtain cord. The tassel concealed the operating strand. Exactly. One cord moved the glass. A branch ran to the old bell wire. On Thursday, Gresham entered the drawing room for a private interview about the accounts shortly after 11:40. Calder had already handled the frame, hence the varnish on his glove, and had probably understood that the apparition was mechanical. He may even have accused Gresham of it. The quarrel became physical. Gresham strangled him with a fine silk curtain cord, which accounts for the smooth fibers Fenner preserved, and then set the candle. Within minutes, he raised the weight, fixed it with waxed cotton, lit the short candle, and left through the passage. The loop burned for about 14 minutes. When it parted at 11:58, the falling weight did two things. It slid the painted plate across Sir Alaric's face and pulled the old call bell wire twice. Miss Cole and Thomas heard the bell and saw the stranger. Because Calder used that bell when alive, they naturally concluded he had rung it. But he had died around 11:44, somewhere close to that time. The exact minute cannot be recovered, nor is it needed. What matters is that the apparent evidence of life came after death, and Gresham was in the hall by then. With Mrs. Grigg and the porter closing the daybook, his alibi was therefore genuine for the wrong period. He also invented the 11:50 courtyard sighting to push Calder's life even closer to the false bell. He was careful enough not to claim a clear view of the face, but he forgot the weather. A man crossing those wet flags would have carried grit and damp at the edges of his shoes. You observed that Calder's footwear had only indoor dust. I felt a degree of satisfaction which Holmes noticed. A medical man is especially useful when he remembers that absence may be physical evidence, he said. The missing account papers? Gresham searched Calder immediately after the murder, but did not find the black private ledger. He took what papers he could from the desk. When Saye later mentioned his abstract, Gresham waited until Adrian was under guard, entered Saye's room with a master key, and burned the pages in the service grate. That theft was his second great error. It proved that the family quarrel could not explain the entire case, because the supposed murderer was being watched while the evidence vanished. And the burned fragment mentioning laundry. He knew the account before Hale had read enough of the fragment to identify it. That was not proof by itself, but it told me the financial trail was personal to him. What of the black cord and false beard in Adrian's trunk? Perfectly genuine stage property. Hale's false solution was persuasive, because Adrian had supplied motive, lies, access to forgotten parts of the house, a beard, and cord. But the preserved neck fibers did not match his hemp line. More importantly, his theory did not explain why Gresham lied about seeing Calder cross the court, or why account papers disappeared while Adrian was guarded. And Saye. His secret was money lent to Adrian, and a codicil he was professionally bound to keep confidential. Miss Cole concealed her engagement. Dr. Fenner concealed Calder's misuse of chloral because he feared professional scandal. Adrian concealed the theft of his mother's letters. Each lied. None of those lies killed Septimus Calder. Holmes leaned forward and tapped ash into the grate. That is why murder inquiries become confused. Innocent people rarely tell the whole truth merely because a crime has occurred. They continue protecting love, reputation, debt, vanity, and old wounds. A detective who treats every lie as the central lie will arrest the busiest conscience rather than the murderer. I looked at the painted plate upon the table. Without the portrait beneath it, the crude black shapes meant nothing. And your final trap. Gresham believed the case had become safe when Adrian looked stronger. Then the missing abstract made him nervous. By announcing that a press copy of Calder's accounts would arrive here, I gave that fear a definite object. He came to Baker Street without invitation and attempted to remove the packet. That proved he understood the danger of the accounts. The fiber, varnish, false courtyard sighting, hidden passage, and timing mechanism already formed the evidential chain. His remark about losing the brass key supplied a final admission of knowledge he had denied. So the packet did not create the proof. No, it caused him to choose among facts already present. For some minutes, neither of us spoke. Outside, a cab passed through Baker Street, and its wheels hissed over wet stones. The familiar city noise seemed very far from Greyfriar's dim west corridor, though I could still recall the dry whisper of glass moving behind a portrait and the faint tremor of a service bell. Adrian Calder and Beatrice Cole married the following spring. Leonard Say recovered enough of the estate papers to settle Septimus Calder's affairs without public dispute, though the embezzlement case occupied the courts for months. Mrs. Pike retained the Greyfriar Hotel, removed the old bell system, and, I am told, had Sir Alaric Ford's portrait cleaned and rehung in full light without any curtain before it. The newspapers made much of the painted apparition and very little of the bookkeeping which had caused a man to die. This did not surprise Holmes. "The public prefers a stranger behind a curtain," he said when I showed him one account, "to a trusted employee behind a column of figures." I laid the paper aside. What, then, was the central clue? Holmes considered. Not the face, not the key, not even the 14 minutes. It was the habit of accepting a sound as proof of a living hand. Once you ask whether a bell can ring after the man who used it is dead, the room ceases to be impossible. He reached for his violin. "And the rest," said Sherlock Holmes, "is merely the difference between hearing and knowing."